everyone, and welcome back to my yearly roundup of all the weird news that has happened in 2024. I'm back today with a few more weird tales from the year just past. This isn't your usual news roundup, this is strictly the stuff that makes you go, "What?" As quite frankly, the regular news is far too depressing and genuinely terrifying. So instead, we'll be exploring a few lighter, weird and wonderful stories that may have not made it into the regular newspaper during 2024. Now that's not to say that these stories don't dally with the dark side, because they most definitely do. But there's also some light-hearted strangeness too. But don't worry, if anything is going to be hideously awful, then I'll give you a heads up first. So with the disclaimer out of the way, let's jump into April. But before we kick off today's stories, if you are new here, then hi, my name's Nikki, and I make podcasts, YouTube videos, and TikToks about all sorts of weird stuff. So if you're into that, which I have a sneaking suspicion that you might be, then please hit subscribe so we can hang out together again. And if you're not new here, then welcome back, old fiend. Nice to see you again. Now, this series takes a lot of planning and effort to produce, and it's just me making everything. So if you fancy supporting what I make to help me create this series and beyond, then please check out my Patreon at patreon.com/Macabre London for lots of bonus content. Now, let's get into the episode. On the 8th of April 2024, the sky over North America went dark. A total solar eclipse swept across the land, plunging everyone and everything into an eerie twilight. The historic event was unusual this time in that the totality of the eclipse lasted almost 5 minutes, a long time to be plunged into darkness during the day. And whilst the event in and of itself was quite remarkable, there were also several other occurrences that happened before, during, and after the eclipse, which may have put this one on the map as one of the weirdest yet. As millions tilted their eyes skyward and watched as the sun disappeared, those who were observing with specialist equipment noticed some things about the sun itself. When totality was reached and the sun was completely covered by the moon, the corona, the ring which still peeks out from the shadow of the moon, showed a little purple flame at the bottom. Some people mistook this as a solar flare, but in fact it's what's known as a solar prominence. This burst of gas and plasma is pulled back into the sun by its magnetic field and happens all the time. But the blackout of the moon, which obscured the sun, made it appear brighter, making it more visible, and during the longer than usual totality, the little purple dots popped up all around the sun, making this a particularly showy experience for those observing. For those who were viewing with telescopes, they managed to spot a once-in-a-lifetime event. Whilst the moon and the sun came together to create their totality, a tiny comet appeared. This piece of space rock, known as a stargazer, was hurtling through space and just happened to appear in the same area that everyone's telescopes were pointed at. So as well as an eclipse, they got to see this microspace debris headed towards the sun, watching it burn up right in front of their very eyes. This rare event, captured by NASA's Solar and Heliospheric Observatory, left experts and amateurs alike stunned. To have such a discovery coincide with an eclipse is as rare as the comet itself, a herald ahead of the major event. And that wasn't it for weirdness. As the eclipse was longer this time, clocking in at 4 minutes and 28 seconds, it had an effect on Earth's creatures. As twilight spread and it seemed nighttime was approaching, many animals decided it was time to go to bed. At many zoos across North America, keepers observed animals huddling together getting ready for bed. Pets were confused and many people took to social media to show how their animals had taken themselves off to beddy-byes. The ongoing effect was also huge, upsetting some animals for days after, with one zoo saying their ostriches had delayed egg laying, and a few farmers said their roosters began crowing outside of dawn breaking, and their hens were laying later over the subsequent days that followed. Now, this phenomenon isn't new. Past eclipses have documented similar disruptions to the animal kingdom. However, the April 2024 eclipse, lasting over 4 minutes in totality in some areas, provided an extended window for observing these eerie changes in behaviour and demonstrated how ruled by the sun's light we all are. And it wasn't just the animals that were fooled by the eclipse. Our technology also was affected. Radio waves were affected by the positioning of the moon, which meant waves had to pass in a different direction than normal, which almost messed up many of the world's digital time updates, the ones which govern everything, such as the speaking clock, and also the time on our phones and computers, amongst many others, which rely on radio waves to stay running on time. The radio waves had to travel further to make their way around the moon, and so valuable nanoseconds were lost. However, luckily the systems are smart enough to recalibrate for celestial events, and so no lasting damage was done. The internet also had some eclipse-related issues. There was a significant drop in internet activity during the totality of the event. In the state of Vermont, internet usage fell by an astonishing 60%, and across the US, an average drop of 8% was reported during totality as a whole. But interestingly, the dropout may have been more to do with people than the sun and moon's game of hide and seek. The droppage, instead, has been attributed to people actually putting their phones down for nearly a whole 5 minutes. As this time people looked up instead of down for once, and the internet got a break. But soon there would be a good reason to pick back up your phone, particularly if you were into astronomy, as there was a rare alignment caught on camera. As if the eclipse itself wasn't enough, sky watchers were treated to a rare cosmic alignment. Jupiter and Venus, usually hidden by daylight, made an appearance near the sun during totality. Now, pair that with all the other delights on display during the eclipse, and this really did make it one for the history books. And it wasn't just astronomers who were interested in the event. Astrologers too were enthused by what this might mean. The ancient art of astrology, which uses the alignment of the stars and planets to predict people's futures, noted that the alignment of Jupiter, Venus, the Moon, and the Sun were all major conductors of energy, and that now was a good time to start afresh, beginning a new major project, or doing something you would never do, as after all, that's what the celestial bodies were doing. So for those in the astrological know, the once-in-a-lifetime event imbued the day with huge amounts of meaning and gave purpose to those who were seeking it. Now, if you're from the UK like me, and you're wondering when you could maybe get some of that sweet space alignment energy, I've got some bad news. Most of us will never live to see it. The next total solar eclipse in the UK will be in 2090. So it seems we'll never get that ever again. However, if you are wanting to chase the moon, the next one will be in Iceland in 2026. So if you fancy grabbing a load of crystals and charging them up, I may just see you there because Lord knows I can always do with the extra help. So, as this eclipse was incredibly rare and special, it served as a reminder of the strange ways in which our universe operates, and even in an age of science and technology, it's a good grounding reminder that sometimes it's good to put your phone down and go and look up at the sky. It's important to remind yourself of the vastness of space and how mind-blowing it is. As humans, we love to pretend we've got everything under control, but sometimes it's good to remember that there are things that have been in the universe for billions of years before us, and there will be things that will be around for billions of years after us. So sometimes that just makes your problems feel a little bit easier to manage. Okay, now coming firmly back down to earth, our next story happens on the streets of London, where something which looked like it was out of an apocalyptic movie occurred. And here is your heads up now for a story which features an accident with some animals, and it is a little distressing, but I can assure you all comes right in the end. Now, it's safe to say that there's not very much wildlife in London, apart from pigeons, rats, and the occasional tube mouse, but generally, animals are not something you see roaming the city streets. So when morning commuters were ambushed by horses galloping through the city, they knew something had gone drastically wrong somewhere. On the morning of the 24th of April 2024, 5 cavalry horses from the British Army's Life Guards Household Cavalry, one of the most senior ranks of the army, rampaged through central London. The day began with a typical morning exercise for the army unit who were on horseback, but within moments, chaos erupted as these huge animals bolted and set off through some of the city's busiest streets. The horses, who are highly trained and very used to being out around loud noises and busy bustling traffic, were setting off on their watering order, a tradition where horses parade through the city daily as a way to give them some exercise, get them used to noises, and to also just add a bit of pomp and circumstance to London. The parade sees riders on the back of one horse, but usually they have another horse alongside them, if not 2. So the rider in control is in a horse sandwich. This is a pretty common practice to see, but with riders being in control of 1 or 2 horses, it's obviously open to issue if one of the horses bolts. But the idea is to put calm horses with more skittish ones so they can learn that they don't need to peg it at the sight of a London bus. Now, if you've ever had any interaction with riding horses, you'll be aware that sometimes they can take offence to the weirdest things and hot-foot it with you on the back without a care in the world if you make it or not. So when something happened which spooked the herd, things quickly got out of control. The calm morning hack was shattered near Belgravia when the sound of falling construction materials spooked the beasts. As several of the horses bolted, 4 soldiers were thrown from their saddles. A few of the soldiers were injured, but luckily not gravely so, but some were rushed to a nearby hospital. The horses, however, galloped freely away from the falling concrete, which had been thrown down a sky chute, the tunnel which is used to transport unwanted building materials into a skip below, and subsequently created a scene of destruction and panic which would span across 6 miles of London. A couple of the horses were captured pretty quickly after escaping, but 2, Quaker, a cavalry black, and Vida, a cavalry grey, both ran in fear and didn't know what to do, so they just kept galloping. Both Quaker and Vida ran around together, galloping at full pelt through the busy London streets, and both sustained injuries which saw them both streaked with blood, but still continuing to run around. As both animals collided with various vehicles which didn't expect to have a horse hurtling towards them at full speed, they made contact and smashed a few cars, buses, and at one point narrowly missed taking out a group of cyclists. But not all the bystanders made it out free of injury. Commuters traversing the city streets bore the brunt of the havoc. 1 cyclist was knocked to the ground, while 1 bystander was injured after being grazed by a panicked horse. Now, of course, as this was quite the spectacle, people grabbed their phones to record the 2 animals fleeing through the streets. As there wasn't enough time to evacuate the streets or get the message out, the quick actions of people helped to keep those in the city inside to stop them being mowed down by the 2 tearaways. The animals were on the run for a while, and by the time they'd reached Limehouse in the east of the city, the adrenaline was starting to wear off, and police knew if the pair made it out along the dual carriageway, which was where they were heading, everyone would be in trouble. Fire and police services scrambled to contain the situation, eventually securing the 2 horses on the highway near Limehouse at around 10 a.m. The 2 horses were instantly taken to Horse Hospital back at the barracks, and after immediate veterinary care, the animals were deemed to be in a serious condition, but both stable, if you'll pardon the pun. The 2 horses required surgery to treat their injuries, and vets worked fast to save the pair. Following immediate care, both Quaker and Vida were transferred to a specialist horse rehabilitation centre in the countryside, the Horses Trust, to fully rest and recover from their ordeal. Interestingly, the pair bonded during this time as well, and seemingly were drawn together by their rampage through London, and have now become best buds. They both received months of rest, physical therapy, and expert care to heal both physically and emotionally, and by July 2024, they were both deemed fully recovered and fit to return to work. In a remarkable comeback, they returned to their ceremonial roles at the King's birthday parade, and both animals took part without issue. But of course, this event raised wider concerns for using horses in the army, and many voiced their opinions about whether in this day and age we should still be doing such a thing. This isn't the first time when horses have escaped from the watering order, and several units across the capital have had problems when carrying out the manoeuvre, with many opting to do it during rush hour, the busiest time on London streets, which potentially puts many more people at risk rather than doing it at a quieter time of day. The army have not commented on the watering order parade, and they're still forging ahead with carrying them out on a regular basis. So it doesn't seem like anything has changed. However, in the case of Quaker and Vida, the army have expressed their gratitude for the quick response of emergency services and the public concern during the event. Critics raise points about the stresses of urban life on cavalry animals and the need for continued evaluation of their training environments, but at this point, that doesn't seem to have made any difference. However, it's good to know that the 2 injured horses made a full recovery, and so did the soldiers involved. So this time, they got away with it. But I'm sure there will have been a lot of checking of the risk assessment before the next parade went ahead. So, how do you feel about this tradition? Do you think it's an important part of London's heritage, a good way to exercise and train the horses, or do you think it's just a game of Russian roulette with the public and horses, with a bad outcome just waiting to happen? Let me know your thoughts in the comments on YouTube or on Spotify. Thanks for joining me for that selection of weird stories. I hope you enjoyed them, and if you did, there will be more along soon, so make sure you're subscribed or following if you're not already to keep up with the series. If you like the show and what I make in general and want it to continue, then please consider becoming a Patreon supporter, like our executive Patreon producers, Christina, Christophe, Heather's Leg, Lisa, Mary, Ravelle, Sally, Sam, Sarah, Terri and Veronica, and all of our other patrons too. If you do sign up to Patreon, you get access to my other podcast, Having a Problem, which is a lot of silly fun. And there's also hours of other bonus content over there too, with lots more planned for 2025. If you'd rather just send a tip or a little Christmas gift from my Amazon wishlist, then I would massively appreciate that too, and I'll leave all the links in the show notes in case you want to check that out. Thank you ever so much for considering doing any of those things, particularly when I know at this time of year, money is always a bit of a concern. So it really does mean the world to me, and I'm always so pleased and grateful when listeners, like you, want to help me create this haunted history empire we can all call home, and it feels very good to know that you do. Now, if you have a spare moment and you wouldn't mind, it would be very helpful if you could tell your friends about the show, leave a comment or repost my social media posts, all of which is more helpful than you know. Thanks for joining me for this episode. I've been Nikki Druce. Remember to stay spooky, and I'll see you ghouls next time for May.